Welcome to PlotFall. Today, we'll uncover the surprisingly harsh realities that would make even the most adventurous soul struggle to survive a single day in ancient Egypt. The sun beats down, relentless and unforgiving. You step into the marketplace of Thebes, and it hits you like a wall. A cacophony of sound assaults your ears, the braying of donkeys jostling through the throng, the hawkers' cries advertising their wares, the rhythmic clang of a blacksmith's hammer, the murmur of 1,000 conversations overlapping, intertwining. The air, thick with the scent of spices, dust, and the faint, unsettling aroma of the nearby embalming workshops, makes your lungs ache. And the crowds. A sea of humanity presses in around you, a swirling mix of Egyptians, Nubians, and traders from distant lands. They brush past, their linen garments clinging to sweat-soaked skin. Children dart between legs, their laughter cutting through the general din. You try to navigate this chaotic ballet, your modern sensibilities reeling. Where's the order? The sanitation? The personal space? This isn't a marketplace. It's a sensory overload. Consider this. You haven't even bought anything yet. You're still just trying to orient yourself, to find a foothold in this overwhelming tide of humanity. The vendors' stalls overflowing with exotic goods. Piles of dates and figs, shimmering fabrics, intricately carved amulets, seem both alluring and intimidating. You clutch your modern currency, realizing with a sinking feeling its utter uselessness here. Bartering is the name of the game, a complex dance of negotiation and shrewd assessment. Are you prepared to haggle for a loaf of bread, to decipher the hieroglyphs representing different weights and measures? The dust, kicked up by the constant movement, coats your throat and stings your eyes. The sun, now directly overhead, intensifies the heat. You're already dehydrated, overwhelmed, and thoroughly disoriented. And it's barely mid-morning. One can only piece together fragments of their daily life from archaeological evidence and surviving texts, yet it paints a vibrant, if challenging, picture. How would you, a traveler from the future, fare in this ancient world? The answer, sadly, is likely not very well. The day has only just begun. The day has only just begun, and already the weight of the past is crushing you. Imagine, if you will, the sudden, jarring shift. One moment, you're scrolling through your phone, perhaps checking the weather forecast, oblivious to the cosmic hiccup about to unfold. The next, the air shimmers, the ground vibrates, and you're thrown headlong into a world of blinding sun and swirling dust. The familiar hum of traffic is replaced by the unfamiliar cacophony of a bustling marketplace. The scent of exhaust fumes gives way to the pungent aroma of spices, sweat, and something vaguely unpleasant. You stumble, disoriented, onto the uneven cobblestones. Gone are the smooth pavements and climate-controlled buildings you know. In their place are mud brick houses, towering obelisks, and the imposing structures of ancient temples. The people around you, clad in linen garments, stare with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. Their language, a torrent of guttural sounds and melodic trills, is utterly incomprehensible. You try to speak, to ask for help, but only a confused stammer escapes your lips. Who are these people? Where are you? Panic begins to set in. You pat your pockets instinctively, searching for your phone, your wallet, anything familiar. Empty. The modern tools you rely on, the connections that tether you to your world, are gone. You are utterly and terrifyingly alone, adrift in a sea of unfamiliar faces and bewildering customs. The sun beats down relentlessly, a physical manifestation of the growing dread in your stomach. This isn't a museum exhibit. This is real life, ancient Egyptian life, and you're not prepared. The day, which began with such jarring suddenness, stretches before you, an insurmountable obstacle course of ancient challenges. How will you survive? The sun. It's unlike anything you've experienced. Not the gentle warmth of a beach vacation, filtered through layers of ozone and sunscreen. This is raw, unrelenting solar power, beating down on you with an almost physical force. The air shimmers with heat, the the sand radiating it back up at you. You squint, your eyes unaccustomed to this brutal intensity. Shades? Sunglasses? A distant dream. The Egyptians, you vaguely recall, used kohl around their eyes, perhaps for some measure of protection. But you have none. And so it was. Within minutes, the first wave of discomfort washes over you. Your skin, used to the controlled climates of the modern world, begins to prickle and burn. You crave the cool blast of air conditioning, the icy clink of ice in a glass of water. Here, there's only the stifling heat, pressing in on you from all sides. You instinctively seek shade, any reprieve from this oppressive furnace. A small patch of shadow beneath a date palm offers momentary solace, but the relief is fleeting. Consider this. Your entire life has been structured around avoiding this kind of intense exposure. Temperature-controlled environments, readily available hydration, protective clothing. None of that exists here. The ancient Egyptians were acclimated to this harsh climate, their lives interwoven with the rhythms of the sun. They understood the dangers, respected the power of Ra, the sun god. But you are a stranger in a strange land, ill-equipped for the realities of this ancient world. The day is still young, the sun still climbing towards its zenith. A chilling thought creeps into your mind. How will you endure the hours, the days, under this relentless sun? The desert stretches before you, a vast expanse of shimmering heat. The challenge is immense. Survival, it seems, will be a battle fought not just against the elements, but against time itself. The desert wind whips around you, carrying whispers of a language you don't understand. It's not just the heat that's disorienting. It's the utter incomprehensibility of everything you hear. Hieroglyphs adorn every surface, a cryptic script that tells stories you cannot access. The marketplace, a vibrant hub of activity, becomes a cacophony of alien sounds. Vendors hawk their wares in a melodic tongue, their words swirling around you like the desert sand. You try to decipher the meaning, searching for a familiar phoneme, a recognizable root, but find nothing. Consider this. You cannot ask for water. You cannot ask for directions. You cannot even ask for help. The simplest of transactions, the most basic of human interactions, are beyond your grasp. Your modern tongue is useless here, a forgotten dialect in this ancient land. The smiles of the Egyptians are warm, but their words are closed doors. One can only piece together fragments, a gesture here, a pointed finger there. You attempt to mime your needs, a desperate charade of thirst and confusion. Laughter ripples through the crowd. Children point and mimic your clumsy attempts at communication. Humiliation burns hotter than the desert sun. This land, which seemed so exotic just moments ago, now feels like a prison. The records tell us that ancient Egyptian was a complex language, with intricate grammar and nuanced vocabulary. It wasn't simply a matter of learning a few phrases. It was a lifetime study. You, however, have no lifetime to spare. The day is slipping away, and with it, your hope of navigating this unfamiliar world. The sun continues its relentless climb, and you are lost, not just in the desert, but in a sea of incomprehensible sounds. What will you do when the sun sets and the true darkness descends? But even more pressing than the language barrier is a far more primal need: water. The relentless sun has parched your throat, turning each swallow into a sandpaper scrape. You stumble towards what you think might be a source of relief, a shimmering expanse in the distance. Hope flickers within you, but as you draw closer, the reality sets in. This isn't the pristine water of your modern tap. This is the Nile, lifeblood of Egypt, yes, but also a complex ecosystem, a force of nature both giving and taking. The riverbanks teem with life you can't identify. Crocodiles bask in the mud, their eyes like chips of obsidian. Hippopotamuses wallow, their massive forms barely concealed beneath the murky surface. Insects buzz incessantly, a constant irritating reminder of the dangers lurking unseen. And the water itself, thick with sediment, teeming with unseen organisms. One can only piece together the knowledge of the ancient Egyptians, who understood the intricacies of this river, knew where to draw water safe for drinking, how to avoid the parasites that could bring debilitating illness, even death. You, however, are blind to these nuances. Consider this. Even if you manage to avoid the immediate threats, the Nile's water is far from pure. Without the knowledge passed down through generations, you risk consuming water contaminated with bacteria and parasites. Dysentery, typhoid, cholera. These were constant threats in ancient times, even to those who called this land home. You have no immunity, no understanding of the rudimentary water purification methods they employed. Each sip becomes a gamble, a desperate attempt to quench your thirst that might ultimately hasten your demise. Your search for water becomes a torturous dance between desperation and fear. The shimmering mirage of relief has transformed into a tangible threat. Where can you turn? How can you survive in a land where even the life-giving waters hold the potential for death? The sun beats down, a cruel reminder of the dwindling time you have left. The sun, a relentless oppressor, pushes you onward. Driven by the desperate need for shelter, you stumble through the narrow, twisting streets of a bustling Egyptian city. The vibrant tapestry of daily life, once a source of fascination, now assaults your senses. The air, thick with the smell of wood smoke, spices, and something far more sinister, hangs heavy in your lungs. Consider this. Beneath the veneer of civilization, a hidden danger lurks. The streets, teeming with people and animals alike, are a breeding ground for disease. Waste, both animal and human, litters the pathways. Flies, buzzing relentlessly, feast on the refuse, their legs carrying unseen pathogens. The records tell us that dysentery, typhoid, and cholera were rampant in ancient Egypt. These diseases, easily spread through contaminated food and water, would be a death sentence for someone with no immunity like yourself. You recoil from a stray dog, its fur matted with filth, as it scavenges for scraps. Children play in the dust, their bare feet exposed to the contaminated ground. Even the grandest of temples offer no respite, their stone floors stained with the residue of countless offerings and sacrifices. One can only piece together the true horror of these conditions through careful study of archaeological records. Each breath you take is a gamble. Each step you make brings you closer to an invisible enemy. The bustling city, once a symbol of life, now feels like a suffocating tomb, closing in around you. The threat of disease is not a distant whisper. It's a tangible presence, clinging to the air, embedded in the very ground beneath your feet. You can feel your modern sensibilities crumbling under the weight of ancient realities. How can you hope to survive in a world where even the very streets themselves conspire against you? The oppressive weight of ancient realities is not just in the unseen pathogens, it's in the sheer, overwhelming press of humanity. Imagine emerging from a cramped alleyway into the main thoroughfare of Thebes. The noise hits you first. A cacophony of vendors hawking wares, children shrieking with laughter, the clatter of carts over uneven stone, and the lowing of livestock being herded through the throng. And the smell, a heady mix of spices, sweat, and something faintly, unsettlingly, like decay. The records tell us Thebes was a metropolis, a teeming hive of hundreds of thousands. Can you picture it? A sea of faces, none familiar, all speaking a language you don't understand. You, a solitary figure adrift in this human tide, are completely and utterly lost. There are no street signs as we know them, no helpful maps to guide your way. The very concept of organized city planning is centuries, millennia, away. Buildings rise haphazardly, a labyrinth of mud brick and stone. Narrow, winding streets twist and turn, disappearing into the shadows. Each corner you turn brings you face to face with more unfamiliar faces, more pushing, more shoving. You try to ask for directions, a simple plea for help, but your words are met with blank stares. The sheer scale of the crowd is disorienting, claustrophobic. Consider this. You are not just lost geographically, but culturally, temporally, utterly. Every instinct, every learned behavior about navigating public spaces is useless here. The very notion of personal space, so ingrained in modern society, is non-existent. You are jostled, bumped, and brushed against constantly. Children dart between your legs, vendors thrust their wares in your face, and animals, chickens and goats, weave through the crowd with unnerving indifference. And so it was, in the heart of a bustling ancient city. You, a time traveler from a world of order and understanding, become just another anonymous face in the crowd, swallowed by the relentless, chaotic pulse of ancient life. Where do you even begin to find your way? How do you even begin to survive? Swallowed by the throng, disoriented and adrift, another assault begins on your senses. The cacophony of ancient Egypt descends. Imagine a symphony of unfamiliar sounds. The incessant bleating of goats, the squawking of chickens, the rhythmic clang of metal on metal from a nearby workshop. Vendors hawk their wares with booming voices, each cry vying for attention in the swirling marketplace. The murmur of 100 conversations, spoken in a language you don't understand, creates a constant, low hum that vibrates in your bones. One can only piece together fragments of this oral tapestry, each more foreign than the last. Then, the smells. This is a world without modern sanitation, a world where perfumes and incense mingle with the pungent realities of daily life. The sweet, cloying scent of dates and figs hangs heavy in the air, battling with the acrid tang of wood smoke from cooking fires. The records tell us that ancient Egyptians prized cleanliness, but the reality is far from our modern sterile environments. The odor of human sweat, of animal dung, of the Nile's rich, fertile mud, permeates everything. It clings to your clothes, invades your nostrils, and leaves you gasping for a breath of fresh, unadulterated air. This air, though thick with the aroma of life and decay, holds no relief. It is the smell of a world utterly alien, a world that operates under vastly different rules. This sensory overload is relentless. It's a constant bombardment that leaves you reeling, struggling to process the sheer volume of input. Your modern sensibilities, accustomed to controlled environments and curated experiences, are completely overwhelmed. The vibrant, pulsating reality of ancient Egypt assaults your senses, leaving you vulnerable and exposed. Consider this. In just a few hours, you've gone from a world of quiet order to a world of chaotic sensory overload. How much longer can you endure this constant barrage? How long before your senses, so accustomed to the gentle hum of modern life, simply shut down? Your senses, battered but adapting, now confront a new challenge: sustenance. The bustling marketplace, a cacophony you've only just begun to tolerate, offers a dizzying array of unfamiliar foods. Gone are the neatly packaged, sanitized options of your time. Here, heaps of dates, figs, and pomegranates spill from baskets, their sticky sweetness attracting clouds of flies. Butchers hawk cuts of meat, glistening under the unforgiving desert sun, while fishermen display their catch, scales shimmering, eyes staring blankly upwards. One can only piece together a meal from this chaotic offering. You cautiously select a few dates, wary of their dusty appearance. The texture is surprisingly pleasant, a chewy sweetness that momentarily satisfies your hunger. But the unfamiliar flora of this ancient land holds hidden dangers. The records tell us that food poisoning was a constant threat, a lurking danger in every bite. Unrefrigerated meat, improperly stored grains, and contaminated water sources were all potential culprits. Even the fruits and vegetables, seemingly harmless, could harbor bacteria your modern immune system is ill-equipped to handle. And so it was, as you attempt to navigate this culinary minefield, a gnawing fear settles in your stomach. Is it hunger, or the first signs of something more sinister? Each bite becomes a gamble, a test of your resilience against an invisible enemy. The vibrant marketplace, once a source of fascination, now feels like a threat. You long for the sterile predictability of a supermarket aisle, the reassuring labels and expiration dates that once seemed mundane. Here, in this ancient land, there are no such guarantees. The food that sustains life can just as easily become a source of sickness, a cruel irony in your struggle for survival. How long before your luck runs out? How long before a simple meal becomes your undoing? The unsettling feeling in your stomach, however, may not be entirely due to the questionable street food. Consider this. Where is the nearest restroom? You search the bustling marketplace, the crowded streets, the imposing stone structures. Nothing resembling the familiar porcelain throne appears. In ancient Egypt, sanitation wasn't exactly a priority by modern standards. Public latrines were virtually non-existent, and even in the grandest of homes, waste disposal was a rudimentary affair. The records tell us that for the average Egyptian, a simple clay pot or a hole dug in the ground served as their toilet. The thought makes you shudder. The casual disregard for hygiene, so commonplace in this era, clashes violently with your 21st century sensibilities. The very air seems thick with the potential for disease. And so it was. The constant threat of illness was woven into the fabric of daily life. You long for the simple act of washing your hands, a routine now fraught with difficulty. Clean, readily available water is another luxury you've taken for granted. The Nile, the lifeblood of Egypt, is also its sewer. While some water is drawn for drinking and washing, it's a far cry from the purified water flowing from your tap back home. You imagine cupping your hands into the murky river, the same water used for bathing, washing clothes, and disposing of waste. The image is enough to quell your thirst entirely. The nagging unease that began with the unfamiliar food now spreads, a deep-seated discomfort born from the absence of basic sanitation. Suddenly, the bustling city feels less like a historical marvel, and more like a breeding ground for disease. One can only piece together the fragmented clues left by history, but it's easy to imagine that the constant threat of illness cast a long shadow over the lives of ancient Egyptians. How long could you endure such a precarious existence? How long before the lack of basic hygiene takes its toll? The oppressive heat shimmers off the dusty streets, making the already chaotic marketplace even more disorienting. The smells, a potent blend of spices, sweat, and something faintly rotten, cling to the air. You stumble, still weakened by the unfamiliar food and water, trying to navigate the throngs of people. Your stomach clenches, a constant reminder of the precarious hygiene. And just when you think the sensory overload couldn't get any worse, you feel a brush against your leg. You glance down, expecting perhaps a stray piece of cloth or a discarded vegetable. Instead, you see it. A gaunt, feral dog, its ribs showing through its patchy fur. Its eyes, dull and wary, fix on you, assessing. A low growl rumbles in its chest. These aren't the pampered pets of modern times. These are scavengers, hardened by the harsh realities of life on the streets of an ancient city. They roam freely, competing with humans for scraps, carrying diseases, and posing a very real threat. A wave of fear washes over you. You've read accounts of rabies in ancient texts, of painful, agonizing deaths. You take a hesitant step back, holding your breath, afraid to make any sudden movements. The dog doesn't move, its gaze unwavering. The seconds stretch into an eternity, the bustling marketplace fading into a blurred backdrop to this tense standoff. The records tell us that animal bites were a common occurrence, a constant risk in daily life. You can practically feel the phantom teeth sinking into your flesh. Just as you're about to bolt, a child darts out from a nearby stall, scattering a handful of grain. The dog, its attention momentarily diverted, lunges for the spilled kernels. You seize the opportunity and quickly slip away, your heart pounding against your ribs. The encounter leaves you shaken, the fear lingering like the dust in the air. And you're left with a sobering realization. In ancient Egypt, even something as seemingly innocuous as a stray dog could be a harbinger of death. How much longer could you navigate these perilous streets? You've escaped the jaws of a stray dog, but the streets of ancient Egypt hold far more insidious dangers than feral animals. Dangers woven into the very fabric of society, invisible yet inescapable, the rigid social hierarchy. Imagine a pyramid, towering and imposing. At its apex sits the pharaoh, a god-king, radiating divine authority. Below him, layer upon layer of priests, nobles, scribes, craftsmen, farmers, and finally, at the very bottom, slaves. Your place in this hierarchy, as a bewildered time traveler, is undefined, precarious. One wrong step, one misplaced word, could mean the difference between a meager meal and a swift punishment. Consider this. You need water. You approach a richly dressed official, his linen robes gleaming in the sun. He barely acknowledges your existence, waving a dismissive hand. You've made your first mistake. This man holds a position of power, perhaps a scribe or a priest, and you've addressed him without the proper deference. In a society obsessed with rank and protocol, such a blunder could be costly. The records tell us how fiercely the ancient Egyptians guarded their social standing. And so it was, that a simple request for water becomes a lesson in humiliation. You now know to direct your plea to someone lower in the hierarchy, perhaps a servant fetching water for their master. You learn quickly, observing the subtle cues of dress, posture, and the complex system of bows and gestures that dictate every interaction. Who to address, how to address them, even where to stand, all determined by the invisible lines of social stratification. One can only piece together the anxiety you'd feel, constantly second-guessing your every move, terrified of unknowingly violating an unspoken rule. The fear of the stray dog now seems almost trivial compared to the intricate web of social expectations that could ensnare you at any moment. This labyrinth of social hierarchy isn't just a feature of ancient Egyptian life, it's Ted's life, and navigating it successfully is the key to survival. Navigating this labyrinth wasn't simply a matter of etiquette, it was a matter of survival. Ancient Egyptian society was a pyramid, its rigid structure dictating every facet of existence. At the apex, the pharaoh, a god-king whose word was law. Below him, a cascading hierarchy, the elite priests and nobles, the scribes who held the power of language, the skilled artisans and craftsmen, and finally, at the base, the vast majority, the farmers, laborers, and servants, who toiled to maintain the opulent lifestyles of those above. Where would you fit in this rigid structure? Chances are, not very high. Consider this. Your modern sensibilities, your egalitarian ideals, would be utterly alien in this world. The very notion of social mobility, so central to our understanding of progress, was virtually non-existent. You were born into your station, and there you would likely remain. Transgressions against this social order, however unintentional, were met with swift and often brutal consequences. The records tell us of harsh punishments for those who dared to step out of line, from beatings and mutilations to forced labor or even death. Imagine accidentally addressing a noble without the proper deference. Picture yourself unknowingly encroaching on a space reserved for the elite. The consequences could be dire. And so it was in ancient Egypt, the weight of social hierarchy pressing down on every individual. This wasn't a society that tolerated missteps, particularly from outsiders. The fear wouldn't be just of physical punishment, but of the social annihilation that followed. The ostracization, the loss of livelihood, the utter erasure of your place within the intricate tapestry of Egyptian life. The stray dog, the scorching sun, these were mere inconveniences. The true danger lay in the invisible lines drawn between classes, lines that could determine your fate with chilling finality. And you, a stranger in a strange land, would be walking a tightrope every single moment of your day. And so it was, as you navigated this precarious social landscape, that the complexities of ancient Egyptian commerce would truly begin to unravel your modern sensibilities. Forget your neat rectangular bills and the cool clink of coins. Egypt didn't operate on a standardized currency system as we understand it. Instead, imagine a world dominated by barter. A world where value wasn't fixed, but fluid, constantly shifting depending on the needs and desires of those involved in the transaction. Consider this. You're at the marketplace, parched under the relentless sun, desperate for a jug of cool water. You reach into your pocket, expecting to pull out a few coins, but realize with a sinking feeling you have nothing that resembles Egyptian currency. The stall owner eyes you with a mixture of amusement and suspicion. He doesn't want your strange, foreign trinkets. He needs grain for his family, or perhaps linen for new clothes, or maybe copper tools to repair his cart. Your modern currency, your credit cards, your digital wallets, these are meaningless here. You are suddenly, jarringly aware of how utterly unprepared you are for this fundamental aspect of daily life. You might offer a service, perhaps your knowledge of mathematics or your ability to read. But even those skills might not hold value in a society that prizes practical physical labor above all else. The records tell us that even when a form of currency emerged later in Egyptian history, it wasn't coins or paper, but often standardized weights of valuable metals, like copper or silver. These weren't universally recognized, and their value could fluctuate wildly based on regional demands and the availability of the metal itself. One can only piece together the frustration you'd experience trying to haggle for basic necessities, struggling to understand the constantly shifting exchange rates, the unspoken rules of bartering, the subtle cues of social status that determined who had the upper hand in any transaction. Your journey through ancient Egypt is quickly becoming less of an adventure and more of a desperate scramble for survival. And the sun has barely begun its descent towards the horizon. The sun dips lower, painting the desert sky in fiery hues, but the breathtaking spectacle offers little comfort. Your stomach rumbles, a constant reminder of the meager meal you managed to barter for. The initial excitement of time travel has faded, replaced by a gnawing anxiety. Where will you sleep tonight? This question, so mundane in our modern world, takes on a terrifying urgency in ancient Egypt. Consider this. The concept of readily available, affordable lodging as we know it simply didn't exist. Forget budget hostels or roadside inns. The landscape wasn't dotted with welcoming guest houses eager to provide weary travelers with a bed and a warm meal. What options remain for someone displaced in time, with limited resources and even less understanding of the local customs? The records tell us that larger settlements might have offered rudimentary lodging houses, but these were often crowded, unsanitary, and likely rife with the dangers of petty theft. Could you risk the potential dangers lurking within those dimly lit rooms, surrounded by strangers whose motives you couldn't fathom? Perhaps a temple might offer temporary sanctuary, but such generosity wasn't guaranteed, particularly for a foreigner with no discernible connection to the priesthood. The vast desert stretches before you, a sea of sand under the darkening sky. The thought of sleeping unprotected under the open sky, exposed to the elements and the unseen predators of the night, sends a shiver down your spine. Even finding shelter among the bustling populace of a city wouldn't guarantee safety. And so it was. The daunting reality of ancient Egypt sets in. Finding food was a challenge, but securing shelter that was a different struggle altogether. The desperation tightens its grip as you realize just how precarious your situation has become. The city walls offer a false sense of security. Within their confines, a different kind of predator stalks, not jackal or crocodile, but human. The bustling marketplaces, vibrant with life and commerce, are also breeding grounds for opportunistic thieves. Consider this. You possess little of value, perhaps a few scraps of scavenged food or a crudely fashioned tool. Yet, even these meager possessions represent a fortune to someone driven by desperation. And desperation in a city teetering between prosperity and famine is a constant companion. The records tell us petty theft was rampant in ancient Egypt. Scribes documented countless cases of stolen sandals, pilfered grain, even snatched amulets, items essential for daily life, and in the case of amulets, spiritual protection. One can only piece together the anxiety that must have plagued the common citizen, the constant vigilance required just to keep hold of their few worldly belongings. Imagine for a moment the strain of never truly being able to relax, of always having to look over your shoulder, of clutching your meager possessions tight against your chest. Sleep, already a luxury in a city riddled with vermin and noise, becomes even more elusive when the fear of theft gnaws at your peace. Even within the supposed safety of your own dwelling, the threat lingered. Homes, often constructed from mud brick, offered minimal protection against a determined thief. A simple break in the wall, a loosened roof tile, and your precarious sanctuary is breached. The thought of losing the little you have managed to acquire is a constant, gnawing fear. And so it was. The reality of ancient Egypt extends beyond the dangers of the natural world and into the complex web of human interaction, where survival often meant trusting no one and constantly guarding against the ever-present threat of theft. What chance would you, a stranger in a strange land, truly have? But the anxieties of ancient Egypt didn't end with a setting sun. A new, relentless adversary awaited. Ra, the sun god, whose scorching embrace offered little comfort. Imagine stepping out each morning, not into the gentle warmth we might be accustomed to, but into a blast furnace. The Egyptian sun, an unforgiving force in a cloudless sky, would bear down on you with an intensity you've likely never experienced. Consider this: no sunscreen, no wide-brimmed hats, no air-conditioned respite. Your skin, unaccustomed to such brutal exposure, would quickly redden, then blister. The burning, a constant companion throughout the day, would be agonizing. And the sun's wrath didn't stop at sunburn. Dehydration, a silent killer, would set in quickly. The Nile, the lifeblood of Egypt, offered some relief, but access wasn't always guaranteed. Imagine toiling in the fields, the sun beating down, your throat parched, your body screaming for water. The meager rations you carried would be quickly depleted, leaving you weak and vulnerable. One can only piece together the suffering of those who succumbed to the elements, their bodies left baking under the relentless desert sun. The records tell us that the ancient Egyptians understood the dangers of the sun. They wore linen clothing for its breathability and sought shade whenever possible. But even with these precautions, life under the desert sun was a constant battle. They were acclimated, their bodies adapted over generations. You, a newcomer to this harsh land, would be ill-equipped to endure. The very source of life in Egypt, the sun that nourished the crops and sustained the civilization, would also be a constant threat to your survival. How long do you think you could withstand such relentless heat, such constant thirst, before your body simply gave in? The relentless sun, however, was just one piece of a much larger, more precarious puzzle. Imagine surviving the scorching heat, only to find yourself facing an even more insidious danger, the ever-present threat of violence. Ancient Egypt, for all its wonders, was not a utopia. The very structure of society, with its rigid hierarchies and vast disparities in wealth and power, created a breeding ground for social unrest. Consider this: the centralized power of the pharaoh, while maintaining a semblance of order, couldn't always reach the fringes of the kingdom. Banditry thrived in the less patrolled regions, preying on travelers and isolated communities. The records tell us of frequent uprisings, local rebellions sparked by famine, oppressive taxation, or simply the desperation of the impoverished. And these weren't just isolated incidents. Periods of instability and outright civil war punctuated Egyptian history, leaving chaos and destruction in their wake. One can only piece together the fragments of lives lived in constant fear. Imagine traveling between cities, constantly looking over your shoulder, knowing that the desert hid dangers both natural and human. Imagine living in a village, always wary of raids, hoping the local militia could hold back the tide of violence. You, a stranger in a strange land, unfamiliar with the local customs, the power structures, the unspoken rules. How would you navigate this complex and often dangerous social landscape? And even within the relative safety of the cities, violence wasn't unheard of. Theft, brawls, even murders were part of daily life, especially in the crowded, bustling marketplaces. The justice system, while present, was often harsh and swift, offering little recourse for the common person. So, you've endured the sun, the thirst, the unfamiliar food. Now picture yourself caught in the crossfire of a riot, or worse, targeted by those seeking to exploit a newcomer. How long before this precarious peace shatters, and you find yourself facing the brutal realities of ancient Egyptian life? The precarious peace of ancient Egypt could shatter not only through violence, but also through a simple misstep, a cultural misunderstanding. Imagine surviving the physical hardships, only to find yourself ostracized, or worse, condemned for an innocent mistake. Consider this: religion permeated every aspect of ancient Egyptian life. From the grand temples of Karnak to the small household shrines, the gods were ever present, their influence woven into the very fabric of society. You, a stranger in this land, would be surrounded by rituals you don't understand, gestures with hidden meanings, and prayers in a language you cannot speak. The ancient Egyptians held deep reverence for their deities, a reverence that manifested in complex rituals and ceremonies. The gods, they believed, controlled the very forces of nature, the rise and fall of the Nile, the abundance of crops, even the very breath in their lungs. One can only piece together fragments of their intricate belief system through the surviving hieroglyphs and archaeological discoveries. Imagine accidentally interrupting a sacred ritual, perhaps by unknowingly stepping into a restricted area or mimicking a gesture you thought harmless. The consequences could be severe. Consider the elaborate funerary rites, for instance. The Egyptians believed in a complex afterlife, a journey fraught with perils and challenges. Preserving the body and ensuring the deceased had the necessary provisions for this journey was paramount. Specific rituals, precise incantations, and carefully placed amulets were essential. What if you stumbled upon such a ceremony, your ignorance leading you to disrupt the delicate balance, to offend the gods and the grieving family? How would you explain your actions, your intentions, when you don't even share a common language? In a society deeply rooted in tradition and belief, a seemingly small transgression could have devastating consequences. Your journey, already fraught with peril, could end abruptly, not at the hands of a thief or a thug, but by the weight of a culture you couldn't comprehend. The weight of ancient Egyptian social customs, invisible yet omnipresent, pressed down on every individual. Consider this. You, a traveler from a distant time, adrift in this intricate web of tradition. You might innocently offer your left hand in greeting, unaware it was reserved for unclean tasks. A simple gesture, yet a profound insult. Or perhaps, parched from the desert sun, you reach for a cup of water with your left hand, unwittingly contaminating what Egyptians considered sacred. The ripple effects of such a transgression could be swift and severe. Imagine attending a feast, the air thick with the aroma of roasted meats and sweet wine. You, unfamiliar with the intricate etiquette, might inadvertently seat yourself in a place of honor, reserved for a high-ranking priest or noble. The room falls silent, the festive atmosphere curdling into shocked disapproval. How could you know? The subtle cues, the unspoken language of hierarchy, all lost on you. The records tell us that social standing was paramount in ancient Egypt. Your unintentional breach could be interpreted as a deliberate challenge, a sign of disrespect, an act of defiance. One can only piece together the potential consequences. A reprimand? Perhaps. But in a society where ma'at, the concept of divine order and balance, was central to life, your transgression could be seen as a disruption of cosmic harmony. And so it was. A simple mistake, a cultural misunderstanding, could escalate quickly. You, the stranger, become the source of disharmony, a threat to the established order. In a world governed by pharaohs and priests, where the gods held sway over every aspect of life, such a perception could lead to exile, imprisonment, or even worse. Your accidental misstep, your ignorance of ancient customs, could be your undoing in this land of gods and pharaohs. Your journey through ancient Egypt continues, and now a new challenge arises, more mundane perhaps than divine wrath, but no less perilous. The labyrinthine bureaucracy, the elaborate system of record-keeping, taxation, and legal proceedings, all meticulously documented on papyrus, would prove a formidable obstacle for the modern traveler. Consider this. Every aspect of life, from land ownership to trade, from marriage to death, was subject to official scrutiny and documentation. The scribes, the gatekeepers of this intricate system, held significant power. Their mastery of hieroglyphs, the sacred writing, elevated them to a position of authority. They were the chroniclers, the accountants, the legal experts of their time. Imagine approaching one of these officials, needing a permit for anything. You, unable to decipher the elaborate script, unable to articulate your needs in their language, become utterly reliant on their goodwill. And what if you needed to navigate a legal dispute? The records tell us that legal proceedings in ancient Egypt were complex and often lengthy. Testimony was recorded, witnesses were called, and judgments were passed, all within a framework of laws and customs entirely alien to you. One can only piece together the frustration, the sense of helplessness that would wash over you as you attempted to navigate this bureaucratic maze. Your modern sensibilities, accustomed to streamlined processes and digital efficiency, would be utterly overwhelmed. The sheer volume of paperwork, The slow pace of official proceedings, the constant need for scribes and intermediaries, would quickly become a source of immense frustration. This intricate system, designed to maintain order and stability in ancient Egyptian society, would become your personal torment. A simple request could take days, even weeks to process. And so it was, trapped in a web of red tape, your journey through ancient Egypt could grind to a frustrating halt. And so it was, lost in this bureaucratic labyrinth, that you'd inevitably encounter one of the true power brokers of ancient Egypt, a high-ranking official or a priest. Imagine emerging from the stifling papyrus-filled office, blinking in the harsh sunlight, only to find yourself face to face with such a figure. Your modern instincts might be to offer a handshake, a casual greeting, perhaps even a friendly joke. A grave mistake. In ancient Egypt, social hierarchy was paramount. These individuals weren't merely administrators or religious figures. They were intermediaries to the divine, imbued with immense authority. The pharaoh, considered a living god, sat atop this pyramid, and his power flowed downwards, through a complex network of officials and priests. To encounter one of these figures was to encounter, in a sense, the divine itself. Consider this: your very survival could hinge on the proper display of deference. Protocol dictated elaborate prostrations, carefully chosen words, and an absolute submission to their will. The slightest perceived disrespect, a misplaced glance, a too casual tone, could have dire consequences. Your modern sensibilities, accustomed to egalitarianism and open discourse, would be constantly battling against these ingrained societal norms. One can only piece together the likely outcome of such a clash. The records tell us that punishments in ancient Egypt were swift and often brutal. For minor infractions, you might face a public flogging, a humiliating experience designed to reinforce your place within the social order. More serious offenses could result in imprisonment, forced labor, even mutilation. And for truly egregious transgressions against those in power, well, let's just say your journey through ancient Egypt could end rather abruptly. The weight of tradition, the omnipresent power of the elite, would bear down on you, a constant reminder of your precarious position in this ancient land. The next encounter, you realize, could be your last. That precarious position, that constant awareness of your vulnerability, would become most apparent when the call for labor came. Imagine this: the Nile floods have receded, leaving behind fertile silt, but also chaos. The irrigation canals, vital lifelines of the kingdom, are clogged with debris. And so it was that the pharaoh's officials, wielding their authority like a weapon, would arrive in your village. Conscription, not a request but a command. You, along with every able-bodied person, are now obligated to contribute to the monumental task of rebuilding. Your days, once dictated by the familiar rhythms of your small community, are now governed by the relentless demands of the state. Under the scorching Egyptian sun, you haul mud bricks, repair damaged dikes, and dredge canals. The work is backbreaking, monotonous, and seemingly endless. Overseers, armed with whips and canes, patrol the work sites, ensuring no one slackens their pace. One can only piece together the physical and mental toll this would have taken on individuals forced into such labor. Consider this: you are not paid for your toil. Your only reward is the meager rations provided, barely enough to sustain you through the arduous days. The nights offer little respite, spent in cramped, makeshift shelters exposed to the elements. Sickness spreads rapidly, and the threat of injury is ever present. You are a small cog in the vast machinery of the pharaoh's ambition, a nameless laborer contributing to the glory of the kingdom. Your own dreams, your own aspirations, become insignificant against the backdrop of these immense public works. And as you look out across the vast expanse of the construction site, you might begin to wonder if this forced labor, this endless toil, is truly any different from slavery. The next segment will explore this further. The illusion of freedom quickly dissipates with the rising sun. The previous segment touched on forced labor, but even those not conscripted for monumental projects faced a life of relentless toil. Imagine the shimmering heat haze rising from the parched earth, the Nile Valley transformed into a furnace. This is the reality of agricultural labor in ancient Egypt, a backbreaking existence under Ra's merciless gaze. Forget the romanticized images of fertile fields and abundant harvests. The reality is sweat, sunburn, and exhaustion. The records tell us the agricultural year revolved around the Nile's flood cycle. Inundation brought fertile silt, but it also demanded immense labor to control the waters and prepare the land for planting. Consider this. Under the scorching sun, you're digging irrigation ditches, hauling baskets of silt, and constructing dikes with primitive tools. Your body aches, your throat is parched, but the work never stops. And so it was, day after day, month after month. Planting season arrives, and you're bent double, sowing grain under the relentless sun. Weeding is a constant battle against tenacious plants, vying for the same precious water. Then comes the harvest, a race against time to gather the crops before the scorching sun withers them. Imagine the rhythmic swish of sickles cutting through stalks of wheat, the chafing of rough fibers against your skin, the ever-present dust filling your lungs. One can only piece together the toll this labor took on the human body. Skeletal remains from this period reveal the evidence: deformed spines, arthritic joints, and signs of malnutrition. The life expectancy of a common laborer was tragically short. There was little comfort, little reward for this ceaseless toil. Your meager rations offer little sustenance, and the evenings, while offering a respite from the sun, offer little solace. The evenings in ancient Egypt, though a reprieve from the relentless sun, brought their own set of torments: disease. Consider this. You wake with a throbbing pain in your jaw. Your face is swollen, your breath foul. An abscess, a common ailment in ancient Egypt, has taken hold. There are no antibiotics, no pain relievers, no sterile surgical tools. The physician, if you can call him that, might apply a poultice of herbs and pronounce some incantation. The records tell us that ancient Egyptian medical practices were a blend of practical remedies, magical spells, and religious rituals. While some herbal concoctions likely provided a degree of relief, many were ineffective and some undoubtedly harmful. Imagine the fear, the helplessness, as a simple infection festers, spreads, and potentially claims your life. A cut on your hand, sustained during the day's labor, becomes infected. Sepsis, a common killer in the ancient world, sets in. The fever rises, your body aches, and delirium clouds your mind. There's no understanding of germ theory, no concept of sterile procedures. The best you can hope for is the dubious comfort of amulets and prayers. Even seemingly minor ailments could escalate into life-threatening conditions. Diarrhea, easily treated today, could quickly lead to dehydration and death in the arid Egyptian climate. And so it was that the simplest illnesses, easily manageable in the modern world, posed constant and very real threats to the lives of ancient Egyptians. One can only piece together the quiet suffering, the pervasive fear of illness that shadowed every aspect of their lives. The fragility of human existence in this era was starkly apparent. The next sunrise held no guarantee of health, only the grim reality of another day of toil, and the ever-present risk of succumbing to an unseen enemy. That unseen enemy often took the form of parasites. The Nile, the lifeblood of Egypt, also harbored a multitude of microscopic threats. Schistosomiasis, a parasitic disease spread by freshwater snails, was rampant. Imagine the relentless itching, the bloody urine, the slow, debilitating damage to the liver and intestines. Treatment? Non-existent. The ancient Egyptians could only attribute such suffering to the whims of the gods. Consider this. Every time you waded into the Nile to bathe, to fetch water, or even to fish, you exposed yourself to these parasites. The very river that sustained life also carried the seeds of its destruction. And schistosomiasis was just one of many parasitic threats. Intestinal worms, spread through contaminated food and water, were incredibly common. These parasites robbed their hosts of vital nutrients, leading to malnutrition, weakness, and increased susceptibility to other illnesses. Children were particularly vulnerable. their small bodies unable to withstand the constant drain on their resources. The records tell us that ancient Egyptian doctors had some understanding of intestinal worms, even prescribing remedies like pomegranate root and dates. But these treatments were often ineffective, and so it was that the average Egyptian lived with a constant, low-grade sickness, a parasitic burden that sapped their strength and shortened their lives. One can only piece together the discomfort, the gnawing uncertainty that came with knowing something unseen was feeding on you from within. This constant state of parasitic infection, coupled with the ever-present threat of other diseases, painted a bleak picture of daily life in ancient Egypt. The next segment will explore how these infections interacted with other common ailments, creating a perfect storm for widespread suffering. The pervasive sickness wasn't the only hardship ancient Egyptians faced. Imagine stepping into a bustling marketplace in Thebes, the air thick with the smells of spices, livestock, and the ever-present Nile. You're surrounded by a cacophony of voices, yet you understand nothing. This, perhaps more than any other challenge, would underscore your alienation in this ancient world. Your modern languages are useless here. The challenges of communication in ancient Egypt were formidable. While the hieroglyphs adorning temple walls might seem familiar, deciphering them in real time would be impossible. This elaborate system, reserved largely for religious and funerary texts, was far removed from daily discourse. The common tongue was something else entirely spoken Egyptian. And even if, by some miracle, you could grasp the basics of their speech, regional dialects and social variations in language would further complicate your attempts at understanding. Consider this: your reliance on gestures, pointing to an object, mimicking an action. These seem universally understood. But even these simple forms of communication, so instinctive to us, carried different nuances in ancient Egypt. What you intended to convey might be misinterpreted, leading to confusion, frustration, or even offense. The subtleties of body language, the unspoken rules of etiquette that governed interactions, would be entirely lost on you. The records tell us that even seasoned travelers and traders struggled to bridge the communication gap. The limitations extended beyond the spoken and gestured word. Literacy was not widespread. Imagine trying to navigate a complex transaction, to explain your needs, your ailments, without the aid of written language. You are utterly dependent on the goodwill and patience of those around you, caught in a silent struggle to make yourself understood. And so it was that the inability to communicate effectively, to participate in the most basic exchanges of daily life, would create an insurmountable barrier between you and the ancient Egyptian world. The very act of asking for help, for directions, for even the simplest necessities, becomes a monumental task, a constant reminder of your isolation in this unfamiliar land. But even if, by some miracle, you managed to navigate the complexities of daily life in ancient Egypt, a far more insidious threat loomed. Imagine for a moment the suffocating fear of being accused of a crime in a land where justice, as we understand it, simply didn't exist. Consider this: no codified legal system, no presumption of innocence, and certainly no right to a fair trial. The legal system of ancient Egypt was a labyrinthine maze of divine oaths, ritualistic curses, and often brutal interrogation methods. The records tell us that accusations themselves carried significant weight. One could be accused based on hearsay, fueled by the whispers of rivals or the spite of disgruntled neighbors. And once accused, proving your innocence became a Herculean task. Imagine being subjected to trial by ordeal, your fate determined by whether you survived being thrown into the Nile or enduring a venomous snakebite. The logic? The gods would protect the innocent. A comforting thought, perhaps, if you were a devout ancient Egyptian, less so for a time traveler unprepared for such divine intervention. One can only piece together the terror of facing such arbitrary justice. Picture yourself standing before a magistrate, unable to understand the charges leveled against you, let alone defend yourself against them. Your pleas of innocence lost in the swirling confusion of a language you don't comprehend, the customs of a world so utterly alien. The weight of the accusation itself, regardless of its veracity, could be enough to condemn you. And so it was that the ever-present threat of wrongful accusation hung heavy in the air, a silent specter that could shatter the fragile illusion of survival at any moment. What hope would you have in such a system? What chance of escape? What chance of escape indeed? Even if, by some miracle, you managed to navigate the complexities of ancient Egyptian law, even if you were declared innocent, the reality of daily life held its own set of perils. Consider this. The very system of justice you desperately clung to was also capable of delivering punishments of staggering brutality. One can only piece together the fragments that remain, but the records tell us enough. Theft, a desperate act born of hunger or desperation, could result in flogging, mutilation, or even death. Imagine the scorching desert sun beating down as the whip cracked, tearing flesh from bone. For more serious crimes, real or perceived, the punishments escalated dramatically. Impalement, a slow and agonizing death, was reserved for the most heinous offenses. The very thought sends a shiver down the spine. And then there was forced labor in the mines, a living death sentence. Picture yourself toiling under the unforgiving gaze of overseers, the air thick with dust, the only sounds, the rhythmic clang of pickaxes against stone, and the moans of the condemned. Days bled into weeks, weeks into months, years even, until your body, broken and ravaged by disease, finally succumbed. Escape was impossible. The desert, a vast, unforgiving prison surrounding the mines on all sides. The ancient Egyptians believed in Ma'at, the divine concept of truth, justice, and cosmic order. But for a foreigner, lost and alone, the pursuit of Ma'at could easily become a twisted nightmare. The scales of justice, so meticulously balanced in theory, could swing wildly against you in practice. Even surviving the initial accusations wouldn't guarantee safety. The punishments meted out were a constant reminder of the precariousness of life, the razor-thin line between survival and oblivion. So, how would you fare against such odds? The razor's edge between survival and oblivion in ancient Egypt wasn't only wielded by the courts. An invisible enemy, far more pervasive than any human judge, lurked in every corner of the kingdom: disease. The very lifeblood of Egypt, the Nile, also served as a breeding ground for a host of infections. Consider this. You, a traveler from a different time, with no immunity to the illnesses that plagued this ancient civilization. The records tell us that schistosomiasis, a parasitic disease spread by freshwater snails, was rampant. Imagine the constant itching, the debilitating fever, the slow, agonizing damage to your liver and intestines. And that's just one of the many waterborne threats. Dysentery, typhoid, and cholera were common, turning the life-giving river into a source of constant peril. One can only piece together the suffering of those afflicted, the desperation in their eyes as they succumb to these invisible foes. Beyond the Nile, the crowded, unsanitary conditions of the cities further exacerbated the spread of disease. From tuberculosis to pneumonia, infections spread like wildfire through the close-packed populations. Even seemingly minor cuts and scrapes could quickly become infected, leading to sepsis and death in a world without antibiotics. The ancient Egyptians had some understanding of medicine, yes, but their knowledge was limited. Their remedies, often a mixture of magic and herbal concoctions, were rarely effective against the onslaught of bacterial and parasitic infections. And so it was that the very air you breathed, the very water you drank, held the potential for sickness and death. In ancient Egypt, survival was a constant battle, not only against the harsh environment and the complexities of social order, but also against an unseen world of microscopic enemies. How long do you think your modern constitution would hold up against such an onslaught? How long would your modern constitution hold up? Consider this. The very act of keeping clean in ancient Egypt was a world away from our modern standards. Forget your daily hot shower, your scented soaps, your arsenal of disinfectants. In the land of the pharaohs, personal hygiene was a much simpler, and by our standards, significantly less effective affair. The records tell us that the Egyptians did value cleanliness. The Nile, their lifeline, served not only as a source of water for irrigation and drinking, but also for bathing. One can only piece together the scene. Imagine the riverbanks teeming with people, immersing themselves in the murky water, a shared bath for the entire community. While refreshing in the desert heat, this practice also spread disease with frightening efficiency. And what of soap? Egyptians used a kind of alkali soap, a mixture of animal fat and alkaline salts, but it wasn't the lather-rich cleanser we know today. It served more as a way to remove dirt and oils than to truly sanitize. Imagine the feeling of grime clinging to your skin day after day, despite your best efforts. Think of the constant presence of dust and sand, irritating your eyes, coating your throat. The very air you breathed was thick with it. Even the wealthy, with their access to better resources, faced challenges. While they might have enjoyed private baths in their homes, the water source was still the same: the Nile, teeming with its unseen microbial life. And waste disposal? A far cry from our modern plumbing systems. One can only imagine the stench permeating the air, a constant reminder of the precarious balance between life and decay in this ancient land. How long, then, do you think you would last in a world where cleanliness was a constant struggle, where the simplest act of washing could carry the risk of disease? The answer, perhaps, is more unsettling than you might imagine. The Nile, lifeblood of Egypt, wasn't just a source of water and fertile land. It was also a breeding ground for creatures that posed a constant threat. Consider this: crocodiles lurking just beneath the murky surface, their eyes fixed on unsuspecting prey venturing too close to the banks. These weren't the smaller reptiles you might find in a zoo. These were Nile crocodiles, some reaching lengths of over 15 feet, apex predators in their watery domain. And they weren't confined to the river itself. During the annual inundation, when the Nile overflowed its banks, these fearsome creatures could be found anywhere, transforming the familiar landscape into a treacherous swamp. And the dangers extended beyond the river's edge. The arid desert surrounding the fertile valley teemed with venomous snakes and scorpions, creatures whose bite could deliver agonizing pain and swift death. Cobras, vipers, and asps, each with its own unique potency, lurked beneath rocks and in the shadows, a constant reminder of the perilous environment. Even within the seeming safety of their homes, Egyptians faced threats from smaller but equally dangerous creatures. Scorpions, drawn to the cool darkness, could be found hiding in shoes or beneath bedding, their sting a painful and potentially fatal surprise. Imagine a world without anti-venom, without antibiotics, without even the basic understanding of germ theory. A scorpion's sting, a snake bite, a chance encounter with a crocodile, any of these could prove fatal. The records tell us of the numerous amulets and incantations employed by the Egyptians to ward off these dangers, a testament to the very real fear these creatures inspired. So, while the grandeur of the pyramids and the opulence of the pharaohs might capture our imagination, consider the daily realities faced by the ordinary Egyptian. How long do you think your modern sensibilities, your reliance on modern medicine, would protect you in such a world? And so it was. Beyond the perils of disease and venomous creatures, another specter haunted the lives of ancient Egyptians: famine. The lifeblood of Egypt, the Nile, was a fickle mistress. Her annual inundation, while essential for agriculture, was unpredictable. A flood too meager, and the crops withered, parched under the relentless sun. A flood too strong, and the precious topsoil, along with villages and homes, was swept away in the raging torrent. One can only piece together the devastation wrought by these erratic cycles from the fragmented records left behind. Imagine, if you will, a year of scant rainfall. The Nile's flow dwindles. The once fertile fields bake into cracked, barren landscapes. The granaries, stocked from the previous harvest, begin to empty. Rations shrink. Hunger gnaws at the bellies of the populace. The whispers of discontent grow louder, echoing through the marketplace, the temples, even the palace itself. You, a stranger in this time, accustomed to the overflowing shelves of supermarkets, would face this looming scarcity with growing unease. Your modern sensibilities offer no protection against the gnawing pangs of an empty stomach. Consider this: your knowledge of modern farming techniques is useless. You have no experience with the ancient methods of irrigation, the meticulous planting schedules dictated by the Nile's rhythm. You are utterly reliant on the success of a system you barely comprehend. And when the harvests fail, when the stores of grain run low, what then? Would you know which desert plants held sustenance? Which insects could provide vital protein? Could you scavenge enough to survive? The ancient Egyptians, though hardened by generations of such hardship, still suffered greatly during times of famine. How long do you think you would last? The grandeur of the pyramids offers little comfort to an empty stomach. The coming days, marked by increasing desperation, are a grim prospect. The Nile, lifeblood of Egypt, was more than just a source of water. It was the highway, the marketplace, the very artery of this ancient civilization. But its placid surface belied a treacherous nature. Imagine yourself now, attempting to navigate its currents. You've perhaps constructed a rudimentary raft, bound together with reeds and hope. But the river is a fickle mistress. Unseen currents can swiftly drag you off course, tossing your fragile vessel into treacherous whirlpools. And so it was for the ancient Egyptians. While they were masterful boat builders, crafting elegant sailboats and sturdy barges, the Nile's dangers were ever present. The river teemed with life, not all of it benign. Crocodiles lurking just beneath the surface were a constant threat. Hippopotami, deceptively powerful and territorial, could capsize a boat with a single enraged lunge. Consider this. You, adrift on the Nile, the sun beating down mercilessly, your throat parched, and suddenly, the ominous shadow of a crocodile glides beneath your makeshift raft. Even if you avoid the river's creatures, the Nile itself presented numerous challenges. Hidden sandbars could ground your vessel, leaving you stranded under the scorching desert sun. Sudden squalls could whip the calm waters into a frenzy, capsizing even the sturdiest boats. The records tell us of numerous shipwrecks, of lives and cargo lost to the river's capricious nature. Could you weather such a storm? Could you navigate the shifting currents, read the river's subtle signs, and anticipate its treacherous moods? The Nile provided, but it also demanded respect, knowledge, and a healthy dose of fear. For the ancient Egyptians, navigating the river was a constant negotiation with the forces of nature. For you, a newcomer, unprepared and unfamiliar with its ways, the Nile could quickly become your tomb. The journey along its waters, far from a peaceful cruise, would be a constant struggle for survival. The Nile, a source of life, also presented a stark paradox. While it offered sustenance, procuring that sustenance was a daily labor, a constant negotiation with the elements. Imagine, for a moment, the relentless sun beating down upon you, the air thick with dust and the buzz of insects. You, a stranger in a strange land, are now faced with the fundamental challenge of survival, finding food, water, and shelter. Consider this. Clean, readily available water wasn't a simple twist of a tap. The Nile, though life-giving, was also a breeding ground for parasites and diseases. Boiling water over a fire you built yourself, with fuel you scavenged, was a necessary time-consuming ritual, and even then, the risk remained. Every sip was a gamble. The records tell us the ancient Egyptians relied heavily on the Nile's bounty. Fishing and fowling provided essential protein, but these skills weren't learned overnight. Could you craft a fishing net from the reeds along the bank? Could you snare a bird with a homemade trap? Likely not. And even if you managed, the meager catch might hardly justify the effort. Agriculture offered more predictable sustenance, but this too came at a cost. Imagine toiling under the scorching sun, digging irrigation ditches with primitive tools, your back aching, your skin burning. The very earth, the source of life, becomes your tormentor, and the food you painstakingly cultivated, subject to the whims of the Nile's floods, to pests, and to the ever-present threat of drought. Shelter, too, was a challenge. The grand monuments of Egypt, the tombs and temples, were for the elite, not for someone like you. A simple reed hut, perhaps, if you were lucky enough to find the materials and possess the skills to build one. Or maybe a cramped, mud-brick dwelling, offering little respite from the oppressive heat. The desert night, though cool, offered its own dangers. Scorpions, snakes, and the unsettling howls of unseen creatures. And so it was in ancient Egypt. Survival was a constant struggle. a daily test of endurance. Could you endure? Could you endure the relentless sun of ancient Egypt? Imagine a sky, bleached almost white with heat, beating down on you day after day. No escape. No air conditioning. No sunscreen. The average summer temperature soared well above 100 degrees Fahrenheit, a stifling, suffocating heat that baked the very earth beneath your feet. The Nile, the lifeblood of Egypt, offered some relief, but even its waters provided only temporary respite from the scorching sun. The very air shimmered with heat, distorting the horizon, creating mirages that mocked your thirst. And the sun wasn't the only elemental challenge. While rain was relatively rare in most of Egypt, when it did arrive, it could be devastating. Flash floods ripped through the dry landscape, transforming wadis into raging torrents, capable of sweeping away homes, livestock, and even people. These sudden deluges, though vital for agriculture, were a double-edged sword, bringing both life and destruction. Consider this. You, standing amidst the chaos, your flimsy shelter collapsing around you, the torrent rising, threatening to engulf everything you own. The records tell us that sandstorms, too, were a frequent occurrence. Imagine the sky turning a menacing yellow-brown, the wind howling, stinging your skin with grains of sand that infiltrated every crevice, every pore. Breathing became a struggle as the air thickened with dust, visibility dropping to near zero. These storms could last for days, leaving a thick layer of sand everywhere, burying crops and making even the simplest tasks a monumental effort. One can only piece together the hardships faced by the ancient Egyptians, constantly battling these unpredictable, powerful forces of nature. And then, after the storm, after the floods, after the scorching heat, the sun would rise again, beginning the cycle anew. The question remains, could you, a modern individual, truly survive a single day in the face of such elemental fury? But beyond the physical challenges, beyond the sand and the sun, lay a deeper, more insidious threat. Imagine yourself adrift, not just in a foreign land, but in a foreign time. The language, a torrent of unfamiliar sounds. The customs, rituals performed with a fervent devotion you cannot comprehend. The very air vibrates with a different rhythm, a different understanding of the world. This, perhaps, is the greatest hurdle of all, the psychological impact of utter isolation. Consider this. You are surrounded by people, yet utterly alone. You cannot communicate your needs, your fears, your longing for home. Every interaction becomes a performance, a desperate attempt to decipher meaning from gestures and expressions. You are a stranger in a strange land, yes, but more than that, you are a ghost. A specter haunting the edges of a civilization that cannot, will not, understand you. The familiar comforts of your life are gone. The music you love, the food you crave, the simple pleasure of conversation with someone who shares your experiences, all vanished. This constant dissonance, this gnawing sense of displacement, wears at the soul. The world around you, once vibrant and intriguing, now feels hostile, alien. The laughter of children playing in the streets becomes a mocking reminder of your own isolation. The scent of cooking fires, instead of comforting, evokes a sharp pang of homesickness. The records tell us little of the inner lives of ancient Egyptians, but we can imagine the deep connection they felt to their land, their gods, their community. A connection you, adrift in time, cannot replicate. And so it was that the greatest challenge in ancient Egypt might not have been the scorching sun, the raging storms, or the back-breaking labor. Instead, it might have been the silent, relentless erosion of the self, the slow unraveling of your identity in the face of profound, unyielding solitude. Could you withstand such a psychological onslaught? Could you truly survive a day, not just in a different world, but utterly alone within it? Alone in a world of unfamiliar rituals, you would quickly find yourself adrift in a sea of unspoken rules. Consider this, the simple act of greeting someone. In ancient Egypt, social hierarchy dictated every interaction. A misplaced gesture, a poorly chosen word, and you've committed a grave offense. You, a time traveler, wouldn't know to lower your head before a superior or to address a priest with the appropriate honorifics. The subtle nuances of Egyptian etiquette honed over millennia would be entirely lost on you. The religious customs woven into the fabric of daily life would prove an even greater obstacle. Imagine accidentally stumbling into a sacred space reserved for priests. Or worse, consuming food considered taboo like pork during a religious festival. The consequences could range from social ostracization to severe punishment. Your innocent ignorance would offer no protection against the deeply held beliefs of this ancient civilization. One can only piece together the intricacies of ancient Egyptian customs from fragmented texts and archaeological discoveries. But even with the knowledge we possess, we can only glimpse the surface of this complex cultural tapestry. How could you, a stranger thrust into their world, navigate these hidden currents? The records tell us that even seemingly simple acts, like offering a gift, were governed by strict protocols. The wrong type of offering, presented with the wrong hand, could be interpreted as a deliberate insult. And so it was. The lack of cultural understanding becomes an invisible barrier, isolating you further. Your attempts at communication, however well-intentioned, would likely be misconstrued, your actions misinterpreted. In this world of subtle gestures and profound symbolism, your modern sensibilities would be a constant liability, a beacon broadcasting your otherness. Could you adapt? Could you learn the unspoken language of ancient Egypt in a single day? The answer, sadly, is a resounding no. Constantly isather. The intricacies of ancient Egyptian etiquette extended far beyond gift-giving. Imagine yourself, a time traveler adrift in this intricate society. You smile, a universal gesture of goodwill, isn't it? Not in ancient Egypt. A broad smile, particularly to someone of a higher social standing, could be perceived as a challenge, a sign of disrespect. Consider this. Your casual wave, intended as a friendly greeting, might be misinterpreted as a dismissive gesture, an insult adding to the growing mountain of misunderstandings. The language of the body, so instinctive to us, held a different lexicon in the land of the pharaohs. Eye contact, something we value as a sign of sincerity and engagement, could be viewed as confrontational, especially when directed at someone of authority. The records tell us that deference and humility were paramount. Lowering your gaze, a sign of submission, was expected. Your modern inclination to meet someone's eyes directly, a gesture of honesty in your time, could be read as arrogance, a dangerous transgression in theirs. And what of personal space? The concept, so ingrained in modern Western culture, held little sway in the bustling marketplaces and crowded temples of ancient Egypt. Your attempts to maintain a comfortable distance, a natural impulse, would likely be seen as aloofness or suspicion. One can only piece together the confusion and offense you would inadvertently cause, simply by navigating the everyday interactions of ancient life. Your modern sensibilities, so at odds with the customs of this ancient world, would paint you as an outsider, a social pariah. Every gesture, every expression, every attempt at communication would be filtered through the lens of their cultural understanding, a lens you lack. How long before a simple misunderstanding escalates into something more serious? The answer, sadly, is likely not very long. The whispers would start subtly. The sideways glances, the hushed tones as you passed by. Your foreignness, already evident in your clothing and mannerisms, would become a mark, a brand. In ancient Egypt, a land steeped in tradition and ritual, conformity wasn't just expected, it was essential. Deviation from the norm wasn't merely unusual, it was often viewed with deep suspicion. And so it was. Your otherness, your inability to flawlessly navigate the intricate social dance of ancient Egyptian life, would set you apart, isolating you in a sea of unfamiliar faces. Consider this. You wouldn't simply be a foreigner, you would be an anomaly. Your language, a strange and incomprehensible collection of sounds. Your customs, baffling and perhaps even offensive to the sensibilities of those around you. The Egyptians, a deeply religious people, viewed their pharaoh as a divine intermediary, a god king. Your modern secular worldview would be utterly alien to their understanding. Could you convincingly participate in the rituals, the offerings, the acts of obeisance that permeated daily life? Your hesitation, your questioning, would be interpreted not as ignorance, but as defiance, as disrespect. The records tell us that Egyptians placed great value on their heritage, their lineage. Foreigners, while sometimes tolerated for trade or other specific purposes, were often viewed with a degree of mistrust. They were seen as outsiders, potentially disruptive influences to the carefully balanced social order. In such a climate, your differences wouldn't simply be curiosities. They would be liabilities. The prejudice you would face wouldn't be subtle. It would be woven into the fabric of every interaction, every transaction, every attempt to integrate into this ancient society. How could you hope to thrive, to even survive, when every aspect of your being screamed outsider? And what happens when that whisper of suspicion turns into a shout of accusation? The answer to that question lies in the darker corners of ancient Egyptian history, a history we'll explore next. The darker corners we alluded to, they weren't metaphorical. Ancient Egypt, for all its grandeur and advancements, was a place where life hung by a thread, constantly threatened from multiple directions. Consider this. Your modern sensibilities regarding workplace safety would be utterly meaningless here. Building the magnificent pyramids, temples, and obelisks that define this civilization was a brutal undertaking. Back-breaking labor under the scorching desert sun, moving colossal stones with rudimentary tools. The risk of injury, even death, was a constant companion. And the dangers didn't end when the workday was done. The Nile, the lifeblood of Egypt, teemed with crocodiles and hippos, creatures that wouldn't hesitate to defend their territory. Parasites and diseases, many unknown to modern medicine, lurked everywhere. Simple cuts could become infected, escalating into life-threatening conditions. One can only piece together the suffering of those who succumb to illnesses we now easily treat with antibiotics. Even within the relative safety of your home, dangers persisted. Venomous snakes and scorpions sought refuge from the heat in the dark corners of dwellings. Food preparation, without refrigeration or modern hygiene practices, carried the risk of food poisoning. The records tell us of outbreaks of diseases like dysentery and typhoid fever, decimating populations. And so it was in ancient Egypt. The very act of living was a precarious balancing act. The grandeur of the civilization masked the fragility of individual lives, constantly under threat. Death wasn't a distant abstraction. It was a tangible presence, woven into the fabric of everyday life. We've explored the social pressures, the prejudice, but perhaps the most fundamental reason you wouldn't last a day in ancient Egypt is simply this. The sheer, constant threat of injury or death would likely overwhelm you before anything else could. What chance would a modern individual, accustomed to a world of relative safety and security, have in such a world? What chance indeed? Trapped in this ancient world, the gnawing question wouldn't be how to survive, but why? The initial wonder at the pyramids, the awe at the temples, would quickly fade, replaced by a desperate yearning for home. But how to bridge the chasm of millennia? Where to even begin? The hieroglyphs, once fascinating symbols of a lost world, now mock with their inscrutability. They offer no map, no guidebook, back to the 21st century. Consider this. Even if, by some miracle, you managed to communicate your plight, who would believe you? A stranger, speaking of impossible technologies, of a world beyond their comprehension? You'd be dismissed as mad, perhaps even dangerous. The priests, guardians of knowledge and tradition, would likely see you as a heretic, spouting blasphemies against the established order. The pharaoh, a living god, would hardly entertain the ramblings of a seemingly deranged commoner. And so it was. The crushing weight of isolation would begin to settle in. The familiar comforts of modern life, readily available food, clean water, basic sanitation, would become aching absences. Each sunrise would bring not hope, but the stark realization of your continued displacement. The nights, once filled with the hum of electricity and the glow of screens, would offer only the vast, indifferent expanse of the desert sky. One can only piece together the despair that would creep into the soul, a slow, insidious poison. The desire for escape would morph into a desperate, consuming need, a fire burning with no fuel to sustain it. The sheer impossibility of the situation, the utter hopelessness, would become a prison more confining than any earthly walls. The question wouldn't be about lasting a day in ancient Egypt. It would be about enduring the crushing weight of each agonizing moment. The crushing weight of each moment, and the brevity of a lifetime. Consider this. You, transported to the sands of ancient Egypt, might not even live to see the sun set on your first day, let alone endure a lifetime there. We, in our modern world, take for granted the expectation of a long life, often reaching into our 70s or 80s. The records tell us a different story for ancient Egyptians. While royalty, with access to better food and healthcare, could sometimes reach a ripe old age, the average person faced a far harsher reality. Infant mortality was staggeringly high. Diseases, now easily treated with antibiotics, were death sentences. Childbirth, a perilous journey for both mother and child, frequently claimed lives. And so it was that the average life expectancy hovered around a mere 30 to 40 years. Imagine that. Your entire life compressed into what we now consider middle age. All the hopes, dreams, and ambitions you hold for the future, truncated by the stark realities of a time long past. The familiar milestones of modern life, graduations, careers, long marriages, retirement, would become distant fantasies, unattainable in a world where survival itself was a daily struggle. This knowledge, this understanding of the fragility of life in ancient Egypt, adds another layer to our hypothetical journey. The despair we previously explored deepens, morphing into a chilling acceptance of a shortened existence. And so it is, the very concept of time takes on a different meaning, a haunting reminder of all that will never be. What would you do, knowing that each sunrise could very well be your last? What would you do, knowing that each sunrise could very well be your last? This pervasive awareness of mortality wasn't an abstract philosophical concept for the ancient Egyptians. It was woven into the very fabric of their existence. Imagine the constant low hum of anxiety that would accompany every task, every interaction. The joy of a bountiful harvest, tempered by the fear of the next drought. The birth of a child celebrated but overshadowed by the grim statistics of infant mortality. Consider this. Every cough, every fever, every unexplained ache would carry the weight of a potential death sentence. There were no antibiotics, no pain relievers, no sterile surgical theaters. The remedies offered by healers, while sometimes effective, were often intertwined with religious rituals and superstition, offering little true reassurance against the very real threats of disease and infection. One can only piece together the emotional fortitude it must have taken to face such constant precarity. The emotional landscape of ancient Egypt was likely a complex tapestry of resilience and despair. Communities undoubtedly rallied together in times of hardship, finding strength in shared experience. Religious beliefs, centered around the afterlife, offered solace and a framework for understanding the inevitable. But even with these coping mechanisms, the sheer weight of daily life, the constant struggle against the elements, and the fragility of human existence must have taken an immense toll. The records tell us of elaborate burial rituals and fervent prayers to the gods, glimpses into a world where the afterlife was not just a belief, but a desperately needed hope in the face of a harsh reality. And so it was. Life in ancient Egypt demanded not just physical endurance, but a profound emotional resilience, a capacity to face the prospect of death with a stoicism almost unimaginable to us today. This, perhaps more than any physical hardship, is the most insurmountable barrier to a modern individual surviving in that world. Could you, stripped of all the comforts and assurances of modern life, find that inner strength? Could you truly accept and live with the constant presence of mortality? The desert sun beat down relentlessly. Another day of back-breaking labor under the watchful eye of the overseer. The rations, meager and unappetizing, offered little solace. My stomach churned, not just from hunger, but from a deeper, more pervasive fear. The whispered stories of the afterlife, the intricate rituals, the elaborate tombs. They were no longer fascinating glimpses into a different culture. They were a constant, chilling reminder of my own mortality. Consider this. Every ache in my muscles, every cough that rattled my lungs was a harbinger of potential doom. One can only piece together fragments of understanding from the hieroglyphs and the hushed conversations of my fellow laborers. The gods, it seemed, were capricious, their favor easily lost, and the journey to the afterlife fraught with peril. Could I navigate the treacherous paths of the underworld? Could I appease the guardians, pass the tests, and reach the field of reeds? The doubt gnawed at me, a constant, insidious companion. The physical hardships were almost welcome. The burning sun, the aching muscles, the exhaustion. They were tangible, immediate concerns. A distraction, however fleeting, from the gnawing fear of what lay beyond. But as the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of blood orange and deep violet, the fear returned with renewed intensity. The darkness held not just the promise of rest, but the encroaching shadow of the unknown. And in that encroaching darkness, a terrifying question began to take root. Was I truly prepared to face the gods? Was I worthy of their grace? The records tell us that ancient Egyptians lived with this question every single day. Could you? The weight of that question, the judgment of the gods, pressed down with an almost physical force. It spurred a final, desperate attempt to improve my standing. I knew my meager offerings at the local shrine were likely insufficient. My knowledge of the complex prayers and rituals, gleaned from hurried whispers and anxious observations, was woefully inadequate. Still, I clung to the hope that even a flawed attempt was better than none. And so it was, with a heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird, that I sought out a scribe. These keepers of knowledge, these masters of hieroglyphs, held a position of power in ancient Egyptian society, a power I desperately needed to tap into. I offered him what little I had, a few scraps of linen, a small clay figurine, hoping it would be enough to persuade him to assist me. He listened patiently, his dark eyes inscrutable, as I stammered out my fears and my hopes. He understood the terror of facing the afterlife unprepared. He saw the desperation etched on my face, mirrored in countless others who had stood before him. Consider this. For the ancient Egyptians, death wasn't an ending but a transition, a journey fraught with peril. The gods, in their infinite wisdom and capriciousness, held the key to a successful passage. The scribe agreed to help, his voice a low murmur that offered a sliver of comfort in the encroaching darkness. He began to teach me the proper prayers, the intricate rituals, the specific offerings favored by Osiris, Anubis, and the other deities who held dominion over the dead. Each word, each gesture, was laden with meaning, a weight that I felt keenly. One can only piece together fragments of their beliefs now, but the intensity, the sheer all-consuming nature of their faith, is palpable even across millennia. But as he spoke, a new fear began to dawn. Was this enough? Would even this last-ditch effort be sufficient to ensure my safe passage into the afterlife? The sun dipped below the horizon, and the darkness deepened. The darkness deepened, not just the fading of the sun, but the chilling weight of uncertainty. The priest concluded the rites, his voice a low murmur fading into the desert air. He looked at me, not with malice, but with a certain pity. Had I truly understood the gravity of my actions, the transgressions I had unwittingly committed throughout this single agonizing day, the weight of Ma'at, the divine order, pressed down, heavy and suffocating. And so it was. The culmination of the challenges, the missteps, the sheer impossibility of navigating this ancient world, the scorching sun, the relentless labor, the constant threat of disease, those were merely the physical trials. The true test, the one that would ultimately seal my fate, lay in the intricate web of religious observance, social customs, and the all-encompassing fear of divine retribution. Consider this: a single misplaced word, an accidental breach of etiquette, a fleeting disrespectful thought. Any of these could tip the scales against me in the afterlife. The records tell us much about the Egyptian judgment of the dead. My heart, already heavy with fear, would be weighed against the feather of Maat. Would it be found wanting? The ibis-headed Thoth, scribe of the gods, would record the verdict. And if I failed, the monstrous Amit, devourer of souls, waited. The thought sent a shiver down my spine, a chilling premonition of eternal oblivion. The priest turned away, leaving me alone in the encroaching darkness. The silence of the desert was broken only by the whisper of the wind, a mournful lament for a soul lost in time. The trial was over. The judgment had begun. The judgment had begun. And so it was, alone in the oppressive darkness of the tomb, the weight of my inadequacy pressed down upon me. I, a child of the 21st century, stripped bare of every comfort, every defense. No antibiotics to ward off the inevitable infections. No clean water to quench my thirst in the relentless desert sun. No knowledge of the hieroglyphs swirling around me, condemning me perhaps in a language I couldn't understand. My vulnerability was absolute. Consider this. The very air I breathed was a threat. The fine desert dust, insidious and inescapable, coated my lungs with each shallow breath. Silicosis, the slow, suffocating disease of the stonecutters and tomb builders, would have claimed me within a decade, perhaps sooner. My soft, modern hands, unaccustomed to labor, would blister and bleed under the harsh Egyptian sun. The simple act of fetching water from the Nile, a lifeline in this arid land, would expose me to parasites and diseases unknown in my time. One can only piece together the fragments of knowledge we have of ancient remedies. But for someone like me, they would offer little solace. The records tell us that even the elite of ancient Egypt were not immune to the dangers that permeated daily life. What chance, then, would I have? A stranger in a strange land, my ignorance a heavier burden than any physical chain. The darkness seemed to close in, a tangible manifestation of my utter helplessness. Even if, by some miracle, I survived the initial shock, the diseases, the back-breaking labor, the cultural chasm that separated me from this ancient world. What then? The whisper of the wind seemed to carry a warning, a chilling prophecy of a life lived and lost in the shadows of the pyramids. The whisper was right. The chasm between our worlds, the sheer unfamiliarity of ancient Egypt, would be my undoing. Consider this. You wake not to the gentle hum of your refrigerator, but the cacophony of a city teeming with life, smells both exotic and utterly foul, assaulting your senses. Gone is the convenience of a supermarket. Food is a daily struggle, a process of bartering, foraging, preparing everything from scratch. No prepackaged meals, no instant coffee. One can only piece together the back-breaking labor involved in simply surviving. Grinding grain by hand for hours, hauling water from the Nile under the scorching sun. Forget climate control. Imagine relentless heat, insects swarming, no escape from the dust and grime. And what of hygiene? The very concept is drastically different. Forget your daily shower, your readily available soap. Cleanliness in ancient Egypt involved practices alien to our modern sensibilities. The Nile, the source of life, was also the recipient of waste. The records tell us that diseases, now easily treatable, were rampant. A simple cut could become infected. A fever could prove fatal. My modern medicine cabinet, my knowledge of germs, utterly useless in this ancient land. And so it was. The subtle yet profound differences in daily life would erode my chances of survival. The constant vigilance required simply to exist, the sheer physicality of every task, the ever-present threat of disease. All of this would wear me down, day after day, until the vibrant tapestry of ancient Egypt became nothing more than a suffocating shroud. What seemed exotic from afar, observed through the lens of history, becomes a stark reality, a daily battle for survival. And in that battle, armed only with my modern sensibilities, I would be hopelessly, tragically outmatched. Hopelessly outmatched. That's the chilling truth. We romanticize ancient Egypt, captivated by its grandeur and mystique. We imagine ourselves strolling through bustling markets, marveling at towering pyramids, but peel back the layers of romanticized history, and a harsher reality emerges. One of relentless toil, ever-present danger, and a constant awareness of the fragility of life. Consider this. The average lifespan in ancient Egypt hovered around 30 to 40 years. Infant mortality was staggering. Diseases we easily combat today were death sentences. One can only piece together the fear that must have gripped a mother watching her child succumb to a fever, a farmer praying for the Nile's life-giving flood, a laborer feeling the first chills of a mysterious illness. And it wasn't just disease. The very environment posed a constant threat. The scorching sun, the unforgiving desert, the unpredictable floods, all demanded respect, even reverence. Daily life was a physical struggle. Imagine grinding grain by hand for hours, hauling water from the river in heavy clay pots, constructing monumental structures with rudimentary tools under the relentless gaze of the sun. This wasn't a world designed for comfort. It was a world demanding resilience, a quality honed over generations, a quality I simply wouldn't possess. So while I might initially be captivated by the vibrant colors and exotic scents of ancient Egypt, the wonder would quickly fade, replaced by exhaustion, fear, and the gnawing realization of my vulnerability. The records tell us of the elaborate rituals surrounding death, the meticulous preparations for the afterlife. Perhaps, in this land of ancient wonders, I wouldn't just be a visitor from another time, but a swift addition to their fascinating yet sobering mortality statistics. A stark reminder of how fleeting life could be, even in a civilization that dreamed of eternity. So, could you survive a day in ancient Egypt? Probably not. And neither could I. Consider this. We've barely scratched the surface of the challenges. We've talked about the scorching sun, the back-breaking labor, the ever-present threat of disease. But what about the social intricacies, the rigid hierarchies, the religious customs that governed every aspect of life, from what you ate to how you mourned? A misstep, a misinterpreted gesture, an accidental transgression against Ma'at, the principle of order and truth. Any of these could have dire consequences. Imagine navigating a world where your modern sensibilities are not just irrelevant, but potentially dangerous. Where your understanding of hygiene, your expectations of personal freedom, your very concept of individuality, clash violently with the established norms. Could you adapt? Could you shed your modern skin and truly embrace a life so fundamentally different from your own? One can only piece together fragments of lives lived millennia ago. We glimpse them through the art they created, the texts they left behind, the remnants of their cities buried beneath the sands. And these fragments whisper of a world both captivating and unforgiving. A world where life was precious, yet precarious. A world where survival was a daily struggle, not a guarantee. And so it was that the imagined journey to ancient Egypt ends not in triumphant exploration, but in quiet contemplation. A recognition of our own fragility, and a newfound appreciation for the resilience of those who came before us. Their world, so different from our own, serves as a powerful reminder of the enduring human spirit, and the ever-present dance between life and death. A dance played out under the watchful gaze of the Egyptian sun, thousands of years ago, just as it is today. We've journeyed through the scorching deserts, navigated the labyrinthine bureaucracy, and even glimpsed the shimmering afterlife promised to the worthy. We've seen how easily a modern individual, accustomed to convenience and sanitation, would struggle in the face of ancient Egypt's harsh realities. From the relentless sun beating down on the Nile Valley to the ever-present threat of disease, the challenges were numerous and unforgiving. Consider this. Even the simplest tasks, like procuring food or finding clean water, demanded a level of resourcefulness and resilience that few of us possess today. The ancient Egyptians, through generations of adaptation, had developed the skills and knowledge to not just survive, but thrive in this environment. They understood the rhythms of the Nile, the intricacies of their complex social hierarchy, and the importance of appeasing the gods. Their lives, though seemingly simple from our modern perspective, were deeply intertwined with the natural world and the spiritual realm. And so it was, their very existence a testament to human adaptability and ingenuity. But what of us? Stripped of our technology, our comforts, and our modern medicine, how would we fare? Could we adapt to a world governed by different rules, different beliefs, and different dangers? One can only piece together the fragments of evidence left behind and ponder our own vulnerabilities. We've built a world of unprecedented ease and comfort, but in doing so, Have we inadvertently sacrificed some fundamental aspect of our resilience? This brings us to a final, thought-provoking question. In our pursuit of progress and our relentless drive to master our environment, have we perhaps forgotten how to truly live within it? Have we become so reliant on the fragile structures of our modern world that we've lost the very skills that allowed our ancestors to not just survive, but to flourish for millennia along the banks of the Nile? The echoes of ancient Egypt whisper a cautionary tale, a reminder of our own delicate place in the grand tapestry of time.